Demonstrators gathered earlier in the day, ready to issue what's been called a last warning.
But Americans read Haaretz, and therefore they say things like Israel is an open society, free speech, you can say whatever you want, you can talk against the war. Not true. Haaretz is the one place where you say it, nowhere else. A good friend of mine described what was going on as North Korea.
Hello, I'm Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 22 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. We begin with news from al-Jazeera about Egypt, where President Morsi is trying to force through a constitution and has declared that his actions may not be overturned by any Egyptian court. On paper, his powers are incredible, more than even the old dictator Mubarak. Mohammed al-Baradei, Egypt's Peace Prize winner, has said that Morsi has usurped all state powers and appointed himself Egypt's new pharaoh. This is stunning news. Recall that in the first round May election, Morsi only received 1/4 of the vote. The forces of the left and the men of the Muslim Brotherhood are battling in the streets. Then to some reflections about an event in New Haven called After the Gaza Bloodbath. I talk about the Hamas and Israeli rockets. Israeli Professor Anat Belitski speaks about the ugly mood inside of Israel. Munji Duwadi, a Muslim civil rights leader, talks about how our protests can become more effective.
Protesters brought their anger right to the walls of the presidential palace. Many were former revolutionary allies with the Muslim Brotherhood, but the president's sweeping new powers over the judiciary have appalled the opposition, and they say the proposed constitution will set back rights and freedoms in Egypt for years. Demonstrators gathered earlier in the day, ready to issue what's been called a last warning.
Here you can see the people from Christians, Muslims, moderate people, liberals, people from all over Egypt are coming here to say no, and they are not paid anything.
I'm against the constitution, and we want to bring down Mohammed Morsi because we didn't elect him, and the country is being ruled by the Muslim Brotherhood. We want a secular state, not an Islamic one.
In 2 weeks' time, they'll get the chance to vote on the draft constitution in a referendum. The president says his self-granted new powers will cease if it passes.
Mohammed Morsi thinks he's got this covered, that he can cope with these protests, and he could well be right. The revolutionary opposition movement isn't unified enough at the moment to do much more than protest, and President Morsi seems content to let them have their demonstrations.
But who is the real Mohammed Morsi? His opponents have two main contrasting theories. First, that he's a naive and inexperienced politician panicked into overreaching by obstructive judges. Or second, that he's actually a calculating strategist trampling over checks and balances to tighten his grip on power. For the Muslim Brotherhood, however, the president is doing what's necessary to defeat the Mubarak-era judges and move Egypt beyond this dangerous crisis.
We are speaking in a context in which there is corruption, and there are remnants of ex-regime who are governing the Supreme Court.
But these Egyptians feel a darkness has descended over their country. After so many years of waiting and such a brief window of hope, it's too terrible a reality for them to bear. Rory Challens, Al-Jazeera, Cairo.
Al-Baradei has been a gutsy opponent of Morsi. Here in this Latuf cartoon, he's holding the bullhorn of January 25th. That's the date, you recall, of the start of the Egyptian Revolution. The Gaza bloodbath caused the deaths of over 170 Palestinians. more continue to die of injuries. About $1 billion in property damage was caused, including the deliberate destruction of the Gaza soccer stadium and the national headquarters of the Paralympic Committee. In New Haven, we held a forum a few days after the start of the truce.
I want to talk about the general framework of what's going on. First, I want to say what it's not. It is not a nation defending itself from terrorists. It is not two opponents in a war. It is not two conflicting peoples with two narratives. On the one hand, you have a settler state with a colonial army. As Lenny pointed out, that's right in the guts of the Zionist enterprise, colonialism. An outpost of so-called Western civilization versus a native population. A state criticized by 78 UN Security Council resolutions. A state practicing apartheid, which is a high crime under international law. A state that was accused of genocide by the UN General Assembly for what it did in Lebanon 30 years ago. And on the other hand, there is a native population of Arab people given second-class status if they are Israeli citizens, third-class status if they are among the tens of thousands living in unrecognized villages. Then there are the others in Jerusalem and the West Bank confined to ghettos, and in Gaza, a huge open-air prison. A population which has every right to struggle for its human and national rights, though the means it can justifiably use in the struggle are, of course, limited. Now about the rockets from Gaza. The State Department and the corporate media repeat endlessly that the Palestinians fire rockets from Gaza and that Israel should not be expected to put up with it and has a right to self-defense. This narrative is a lie. Human Rights Watch reports that from September 2005 to May 2007, Palestinians in Gaza shot 2,700 missiles into Israel, killing 4. But during the same time, Israeli troops shot 14,617 artillery shells into Gaza, killing 59 Palestinians. That's 5 times as many projectiles, and of course the Israeli ones were much more accurate and deadly. In 2008, Hamas had a truce with Israel for 5 months. It was Israel that broke the truce on our election day, November 4th, 2008, by killing 6 Palestinians. Hamas retaliated, and then Israel started the long-planned Operation Cast Lead, which killed 1,400 Palestinians. A few days ago, the Boston Globe published an article by Sarah Roy. We have some copies in the back, a Harvard researcher. She says that between February 2009, just after Operation Cast Lead, and August 2012, Israeli attacks in Gaza averaged 6 per week. They came by aircraft, helicopter gunships, drones, and tanks throughout Gaza. The attacks took the form of confiscation of or damage to fishing boats and the detention and arrest of fishermen, attacks on industrial, farm, and food production facilities, and military ground incursions. The point of this recitation is to say that the tale of an Israel taking it until it can take it no more is a pure falsehood. Israel has been attacking freely, determined to root out Hamas from power, determined to get back that soldier Hamas had captured, determined to utterly subdue Palestinians. Now, this is not to justify the Gaza rocket attacks. As far as I can tell, they land randomly and are militarily useless. I believe they are shot off in revenge for Israeli attacks or to somehow affect Israeli policy. Attacks that are known to mainly result in civilian deaths are, of course, wrong. As for why they do, according to an Israeli Minister of Intelligence, Dan Meridor, Israel struck 10 times as many targets in the attack as they did in 2008-2009. The worst attack was the bombing of the home of the al-Dailu family in which 9 members of the same family, including 4 children, were killed. The U.S. government has been, the U.S. government response has been to back Israel 100%. The House and Senate, in fact, passed resolutions in support of Israel without any debate and with no votes. They just said, is there any opposition? And there was none in the House or in the Senate. The president, who is now in his 2nd term and is free to say what he really feels, said he feels Israel has a right to defend itself. At no point did Netanyahu or AIPAC complain about the lack of support from the U.S. or any restrictions coming from the White House. Polls suggest Americans supported Israel in the conflict by a large majority, 57%, and then only 13% have sympathy with Palestinians. Interestingly, only 41% of the Democrats support the attack. Anti-war demonstrations were plentiful, but small. It's difficult for you to time yourself, so I think I'm going to end here just with, after all this down thing, one small little ray of hope. I did want to mention that Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a large and growing Jewish organization, it claims 100,000 members and supporters. They did condemn the attack on Gaza and urged its members to counter-demonstrate any of the pro-war demonstrations. So in this bitter time, there's that tiny bit of encouragement. Thank you.
Okay, so I was asked to talk basically about the Israeli mood, and I think you've heard about a lot of it in the newspapers. A lot of it was reported. Some was sort of backstage instead of frontline, but the mood itself, I think, was reported well. I was on the phone basically every hour with people in Israel. I'm very cynical about certain things that I heard there, so if I get too cynical, stop me, especially about Hillary Clinton and her visit there. But I'll finish off with that. So let me just say that the first thing that one does notice when you think of Cast Lead in 2008-9, the previous onslaught on Gaza, the first thing that you do notice is that Israel is affected by world opinion, even though we think of it as bloodthirsty and colonialist and aggressive. They're very smart. They know what they're doing. They know who they need to kowtow to. They know who they need to, well, I guess, sort of ass-lick, excuse me for that word. So the Israeli authorities were playing this one much smarter than they had in 2008-9. The Goldstone report, for instance, notwithstanding his own retraction, did have an effect in Israel. So they were very careful this time. 162 people is terrible, but it's not 1,400 people. And they had most of the 1,400 right in the first week of that one over there. So they were definitely being much more careful this time. Nevertheless, the public mood was very much like 2008-9. Still, if you look at the numbers, and I noticed that Stan said, in this bitter time, a tiny bit of encouragement. So the number of people supporting the war, people being Jews supporting the war, went down from 98% to 91%. Now, 91% were still for this war, but going down from 98 to 91 meant somebody had either learned a lesson, thought differently, or knew what was going on. 91% means that there are 1 out of 10 people who were not gung-ho for this, as opposed to the 2008-9 onslaught, which was just terrible. You couldn't open your mouth then against it. You did have 10% here, at least wondering. By the way, the 9, not 10, 9% who were not for the war were split between 5% who were against it, and 4% just didn't have an opinion. So it's actually the 5% that were really against the war that I will get to much later, but they're the ones who are, of course, what did you call it? A tiny bit of encouragement. All right. and one more number, only 30% were for the ground attack. During these 8 days, it was all bombardment from the sea and from on high, from the air. The idea of going in on the ground means a different type of war. We had gone through the same kind of dilemma in Lebanon too, and in Kasled they did send the army in. This time they called up 75,000 reservists. So it was clear that the army, sorry, I shouldn't say it was clear, the army pretended that it might be going in. Netanyahu let us understand that he would be going in on the ground, and he even put it up as a sort of dilemma. So people did feel that they could say something about going in on the ground. Now, it's not that by going in on the ground they were afraid that we would be hurting more Gazans. That didn't interest anybody. But it's clear that if you go in on the ground, you might put at risk your own soldiers. And only 30% were for a ground offensive, which is also, for me, a little bit of light. People were not the same type of gung-ho craziness that we had in 2008-9. Still, that's a little bit of encouragement. In general, and in contrast to what you might have expected, any of you who read Haaretz op-eds, you see the people who are writing against it. That's minuscule, but Americans read Haaretz, and therefore they say things like Israel is an open society, free speech, you can say whatever you want, you can talk against the war. Not true. Haaretz is the one place where you say it, nowhere else. A good friend of mine described what was going on as North Korea. In other words, all you could hear on TV, in the radio, were army personnel, ex-generals, present generals, current officers, everybody commenting, analyzing, all telling the same story that Stan has started with. The narrative, the Israeli and American narrative is always, the Palestinians started it, we're the victims, we've been undergoing thousands of missiles coming in, not missiles, rockets coming in, and we just couldn't take it anymore. We had to react. The big Israeli ad that made it abroad was a picture of the Eiffel Tower and another one of the Big Ben, I think, saying to the French and the Brits, what would you have done? In other words, had you been in our situation, victims getting rockets, tens of thousands, it's not tens of thousands, I think that they're talking about 12,000 rockets in 8 years landing on you, you would have done the same. So that was what Israelis were getting also. I do want to say that Israelis are in a panic over this. I can say that their fear is manipulated, but that doesn't mean that the fear is not for real. So yes, they are sure that they're victims. Kids do think that we're being attacked. I know that we're not. I know numbers like Stan does, so I make fun sometimes when kids tell me that we're being attacked. Let me just add one little thing to your numbers. Every Qassam has a kilo, which is 2.2 pounds of firepower in it. So go figure, 1,200 Qassams are equal to, no, a little less than that, are equal to 1 ton. One Israeli bomb from an F-16 is 1 ton. So I know we're not, in human rights, we're not supposed to do quantitative comparisons, but all of those missiles together do not equal 2 bombs that Israel throws from the air. Again, I don't make fun of anybody who happened to have had a Qassam land on him and kill him. But these really are, we treat them in Israel, those of us on our side think of them as, what's it called, pickup sticks. Okay, these are pickup sticks landing on you. Not pleasant when a pickup stick lands on you. But you really, there's no comparison, not firepower or anything else. And in this war, again, we had Fajrs and Scuds coming in because apparently Hamas did, not just Hamas, sorry, the Palestinians did get better firearms, but nothing compared to Israeli power. That was just a side thing about the numbers that you had given. All right, so talk about North Korea. Talk about this being a certain mood, especially in the media, and then imparted to everybody else. It's not only people on the ground, regular people in the street, and it's not only the leaders. It's everybody talking the same talk, engaging in the same kind of discourse. I think you might have seen this because this was in the newspaper. Eli Shai, who's the interior minister, said we have to take Gaza back to the Middle Ages. Gilad Sharon, son of course, said we should flatten Gaza like the U.S. did to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Michael Ben-Ari, who is a Knesset member, said there are no innocents in Gaza. We should hit them all hard. This is my translation, so I'm not sure it's exactly. And give them 6 hours notice before expelling all of them to Egypt. These are the leaders. People on the street said things, and I just took down a bunch of quotes that I had. We finished off Hezbollah in 2006.
The library will close in 5 minutes. Be sure to take your belongings with you when you exit, and thank you for using the services of the New Haven Public Library.
We finished Hezbollah off in 2006. That's why there's quiet there. That's one of the things that people were saying. So we have to finish off Hamas. It will be quiet from there. Somebody else said, everybody said, we raised the whole Dahiya neighborhood to the ground. Let's get some more. A third person said, a lot of people said, why didn't we kill more civilians? And that was the general mood. So let me, in protests, I hate to be pessimistic and say that there's no real leftist movement. There are left parties, and let me just mention 2 of them, and with that I will finish. Hadash, which is the Communist Arab Jewish Party, which I must say is the left's favorite. Hadash did go out in the street. They immediately came out against it. That was to be expected. The big surprise is Meretz. Meretz is the only leftist Zionist movement left. If you don't think that leftist Zionist is an oxymoron, which I do, but since there is that party, I do want to give them credit. They came out against it right from the beginning. Zehava Galon, who's head of the party, who's in Knesset, who in 2008-9 was isolated because she was against that while the party was for the onslaught then. The party supported it. This time she's leader of the party. She got the party against it. They organized some of these demos. They were the only party, again, Zionist party in the demos, and they consistently held out against what was going on. So again, if you want to look for a little bit of light, that's what I was looking for.
Thank you.
I'm going to speak about this issue from a completely different angle, which is an angle of an activist, of somebody who lives in the U.S., in Connecticut. I consider myself an activist.
The New Haven Public Library is
an activist within the Muslim community. I work with the Council on American Islamic Relations. It's a civil rights organization. Primarily, that's what we do, is we talk about the issues of discrimination within the Muslim community. We talk about Islamophobia. Yet, a couple of years ago, I believe, we were ranked by ADL as the number 3 organization in the U.S. that's most outspoken against Israel, something like that. So we were proud of that, even though we were not doing that much work. I guess a couple of press releases or statements and some of the work we did back during the first attack on Gaza kind of bothered ADL and others, and so they ranked us number 3. I think for us to be effective, and we can all talk about the outcome of this attack and the first attack in Gaza in 2008, 2009, and see what have we done to be effective in stopping the attack or slowing down the attack or exposing the attack. I'm not sure of how can we quantify that, but I think my observation, at least my humble opinion, is that we are not that effective, at least from my angle. Even within the Muslim community, we have that kind of sentiment, if you will. People feel there's not much they can do. We are not well organized. We are not well prepared, equipped to deal even on the public opinion issue, which is something that maybe we have a chance in combating it if we can somehow turn the tide. I was hoping that the Arab Spring would give us a little bit of inspiration of how did they do that back home? How did these groups, even though they did not control the mass media, they did not control the official voice of the people, how did they break through that wall? I'm not sure if I have the answer, but I think some of the ingredients that I've seen, and at least from my readings, from my contacts with, I'm from Tunisia, by the way. Graduated from Tunisia in '85 and came to this country, but I visited Tunisia this past summer. I spent about a month and a half with my family and friends. And one of the essential ingredients for success is that there's so many groups that realize that there is a common enemy, if you will. And they work toward that as a common goal. I've seen leftists, I've seen Islamic movement members, I've seen nationalists, I've seen human rights activists stood up together. They went into hunger strikes together. And they, once that front was formed, it galvanized the national opinion against that government. And it made it so easy for that government to crumble once the ball started to roll. And I think we could do that here. I don't mean bring down the government. I mean be more effective.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.
When the world has gone crazy and it's all becoming clear, when they're gunning down our comrades and it seems the end is near, as they're loading up the launchers for the tear gas grenades, we can take off our bandanas and kiss behind the barricades. When it's madness all around and you can see this at a glance, we will sing and we will cry, we will laugh and we will dance, as they shout their marching orders beneath the helicopter blades. We shall seize the moment for a kiss behind the barricades. They will try to break our spirit, and at times they may succeed, but our love for the world is stronger than their greed. When the building is surrounded and hope begins to fade, in my final hour, a kiss behind the barricades. As the movement grows, there will be hills and bends, but at the center of the struggle are your lovers and your friends. And the more we hold each other up, the less we can be swayed. Here's to love and solidarity, and a kiss behind the barricades.